If you had to design the perfect heist, one to steal the most closely guarded secret of the most powerful institution of the world, who would you choose and why? A seasoned spy? A rogue diplomat? Or perhaps a 14-year-old child who likes playing the piano? Well, in 1770, that child is exactly who walked out of the Vatican with their deepest secret in his head. But as we're about to see, this heist might be the greatest case of mistaken identity in music history. Did Mozart actually steal the music, or are we all just victims of a 250-year-old marketing lie? Allegri's Miserere wasn't just a composition, it was a forbidden experience. For over 150 years, the Pope kept it under lock and key in the Sistine Chapel, threatening excommunication for anyone who dared to transcribe it. But why? It wasn't about money or copyright, it was about sanctity. The Pope deemed it so ethereally beautiful that it had to remain a Vatican tradition. We also need to remember the music alone was not a standalone thing. It wasn't simply the notation itself, but also how the song was an important part of tradition and performance. It was important to the Vatican as the nature of the ceremony was religious and sacred. It wasn't just a good song to be distributed, but part of a wider tradition. It's also very important to note what we actually mean by secret. As you may have been thinking, what's to stop any professional musician with a good ear from writing this down? Well, it was specifically the abbellimenti, or the ornamentation. Anyone could write down the melody, but the secret was in the hidden vocal flourishes that the choir often improvised. These subtle embellishments are even a topic of musical debate to this day. The song was kept sacred for over a century, but for Mozart, it only took 14 years of curiosity to uncover the secret. With his father Leopold, who is also our primary source on this story, Mozart would visit the St. Peter's Church for the Holy Week. Sat on the church pews in a dimly lit chapel for a Wednesday service, he heard the piece for the first time, and it immediately stuck with him. Later that night, he lay awake in his lodgings, tossing and turning, unable to sleep. He wrote down the song which was weighing on his mind, almost perfectly. Both Mozart and his father would return to St. Peter's for Good Friday to hear the piece again. It was here Mozart would make his final tweaks and enlighten the world of one of the greatest musical mysteries in the world. If that account seems a bit too dramatic, that's because it likely is. Now, history is rarely as clean-cut as the legends suggest. We only have the letters written by Mozart's father to go on, and we have to be critical. Mozart wrote his first composition at 5 years old, the famous Minuet and Trio in G. Most people assume Mozart's memory was almost supernatural, but if we look at the evidence, he was an observer, not a magician. There is also evidence of his great musical memory in Sloboda's The Musical Mind and in Solomon's account of Mozart's life. There, they show plenty of evidence of his great retention of music simply by ear. However, we have to ask an important question. How did the Vatican possibly keep this such a tight secret for over a century? The answer is they didn't. The piece, although varied due to the strict nature of its performance, was copied and passed around in musical circles. There are at least 3 copies of the song transcribed before Mozart, one of which was transcribed by a man who was actually in contact with Mozart and his father at the time. It is speculated he may have seen these transcriptions when they were together, and this gave him a baseline when he actually heard the song for the first time. As I said before, we must understand that back then, the complex vocal ornamentation wasn't actually written down in standard music notation. However, it is something Mozart actually did, and this is what set his piece apart from others. The thing is, we just don't know. It's very much possible either one is true, but what we do know is that Mozart's version was indeed the most strikingly accurate, with only minor differences and one major difference, which is usually the main talking point of the song itself. Mozart went to London and had his work published in 1771, breaking the secretive tradition of the church. A year later, Mozart was excommunicated and forced into a life of solitude and secrecy, before disappearing from the history books entirely. Wait, no, sorry, that's the wrong script. Here we are, yes. Nothing happened. In reality, Pope Clement XIV was actually extremely impressed and praised Mozart, potentially seen as a political move, as punishing a 14-year-old for an already circulating piece of music would certainly have made him look bad. I genuinely think he did it from the good of his heart. Mozart was summoned to Rome and awarded the Order of the Golden Spur, a prestigious papal order of knighthood for major accomplishments. Because of both the story and the beautiful composition, the song became one of the most famous musical pieces in history and can be seen as evidence of a political and societal shift. In the wider picture, Mozart existed in the aftermath of the Renaissance, when ideas of freedom and personal philosophy were growing more popular and being rediscovered. This story is a musical angle on how things once kept secret and sacred by the state and the church were becoming liberated to the people and understood better. I really wanted to talk about the history and the context, as that's what this channel is all about, but of course I would also recommend you look at the theory itself, as the way the versions differ is actually very interesting. We often look at history as a series of set-in-stone events, but the story of the Miserere reminds us that history is often just a battle between those who want to hide information and those who, like a curious 14-year-old in a chapel, can't help but share it. I've been Glass Gecko, and thank you so much for watching.